then assembled out at your airplane and got the information from your officers if they had anything. The navigator usually tell us what the weather was supposed to be over the target. And then we'd form up over England, which was quite often dangerous because it might be going through clouds. It was very foggy. They didn't even attempt it, but it wasn't unusual to have air-to-air collisions while you were forming up. But eventually we'd get formed up and in formation and head across the channel. And you were stuck in that airplane for quite a few hours when you went to Berlin. No, nothing to eat. I think they gave us a candy bar. One time they gave us an orange. That works real good at 28,000 feet, 60 below. We could have thrown those at the enemy. Getting to Berlin, quite often we'd encounter flak because they had their 88s mounted on rail cars and trucks, and they moved them around, and I swear they knew where we were, what our flight pattern was. Because quite often we'd get flak on the way, and you didn't dodge around it. You had to stay on your course. But as you approached Berlin, if some other group was ahead of you, the air was black with flak, and that's what you had to fly through. On the bomb run, the Bombardier, the pilot turned the thing on autopilot, so the Bombardier controlled the airplane on the flight over the target, because he's the one who's aiming the Sperry at the ground. And so he just flew through that like that was the only way to go. And it was very exciting. I'd like to have been able to shoot at something, but of course I couldn't do that. I could see plenty good through the top of my Radio Shack. It was wide open. The two little windows on the side weren't very good for seeing things, but I could see enough. Probably all I wanted to.
With the Luftwaffe on its knees, the 8th Air Force turned its attention to supporting the D-Day invasion and subsequent campaign in Normandy. The flying fortresses hit coastal emplacements and other targets along the beaches just prior to the landings, then took part in carpet bombing operations against German troops. One such mission virtually destroyed the German Panzer Lehr Division in July of 1944 and helped pave the way for the American breakout from the beachhead. Once the Allied armies broke out of Normandy and began driving toward Germany, the 8th Air Force turned to new targets in hopes of shortening the war. Up until early September of 1944, the heavy bombers had mainly attacked aircraft factories, U-boat assembly plants or pens, docks, and ball-bearing factories. In May, the bombers had begun hitting oil refineries and synthetic fuel plants. D-Day delayed hitting any more of these targets until the fall of 1944, but in September, the mighty 8th returned to Germany and systematically destroyed the Reich's ability to process fuel. The attacks were an incredible success. By December, the 8th Air Force had knocked out almost half of Germany's refineries, precipitating a fuel crisis within the German army. Just when the Wehrmacht needed mobility the most, its panzers ground to a halt for want of oil and gas. Desperate measures were tried to get around this problem, including the construction of charcoal-burning engines that tanks could use, but they were too little, too late. The Flying Fortress had at last delivered the knockout punch the pre-war bomber advocates fervently believed it could do. At the same time, the 8th's bombers were used to attack marshalling yards and rail centers throughout Germany.
Mainly, most of my missions in those days were the marshalling yards. We were trying to destroy the transportation system so they couldn't move anything around by train. And we did. We really destroyed the area, because later on when I went to Germany, it took me 5 days to go. on train because they had to go all over the place because they had to go where the tracks were still left. But that was mainly what we were doing at the end of the war, is bombing the tracks, train tracks, marshalling yards, destroying any moving stock. By the end of the war, most of everything that the Germans had was already destroyed. It was really destroyed.
The destruction of the Reich's rail net proved to be one of the Flying Fortress's most significant contributions to the war effort. German industry depended on the railroads to deliver raw materials and carry away finished products. By late 1944, the railroad system had all but collapsed under the weight of B-17-borne bombs. Even the barest necessities could not be transported effectively via rail by the end of 1944. Coal, the lifeblood of German industry, piled up near the mines with no way to get it to the factories that so badly needed it. By January, this caused a full-scale collapse of the German economy. And still, even as Nazi Germany twisted in its death throes, the B-17 crews continued to take heavy losses. No longer were German interceptors much of a threat. With thousands of bombers and thousands of fighters ranging across the Reich, the Luftwaffe had been all but swept from the skies. Flak, however, was a different matter entirely. The Germans concentrated hundreds of anti-aircraft batteries around crucial oil targets until some factories were defended by over 1,000 heavy guns. Using radar guidance, late-war German anti-aircraft fire brought down thousands of American aircraft, fighters, medium bombers, and even the high-flying B-17s.
There was another air raid in the afternoon, and here came the 8th American Air Force. I think it was a multi-effort, because I think I counted over 90 planes or 100 planes, B-17s, and the German aircraft artillery apparently had them just right. All of a sudden I saw one bomber blow up and 9 parachutes and another one, and at one time I counted 27 parachutes.
Flak became the worst menace the B-17 crews faced.
Our biggest fear was the flak, because when I got there, we were really making strides on the ground, and we were pushing the Germans back, which time they're bringing all their flak guns back and concentrating them in the cities. So when we started into a target and you looked up ahead, it looked like a piece of white paper with a dropping ink drops down all over the paper. It was just a massive airspace of black flak bursts. And we were losing a lot of planes because of that, too.
It was a milk run, which is supposed to be an easy mission, just across the channel to a Luftwaffe airfield in pretty sure it was France. Now, it could have been Belgium, but hard to remember. Anyhow, 3 airplanes. It was a big mission. And we went storming over there. I think we even left at a decent time in the morning. And as I say, a milk run, that means you're not supposed to have any trouble. Well, we didn't until we got over the target on our bomb run, and they cut loose with very accurate anti-aircraft fire. And we're plastering stuff all over us. We were flying on number 2 spot, the airplane on the starboard side of us took a hit. Must have been oxygen tanks. And something got fired.